Have you ever noticed how fear has quietly controlled your life without you even realizing it? It stopped you from speaking when you had something important to say. It stopped you from trying when your heart wanted to move forward. It stopped you from trusting yourself, not because you were weak, but because your mind showed you images of failure that never actually happened. Fear made you believe that something was wrong with you, when in reality nothing was wrong except the illusion created inside your own mind. Buddhism teaches something shocking. It teaches that fear is not real in the way you think it is. It is not an external force controlling your life. It is a mental shadow that only survives because you keep believing it. And the moment you learn to calm your mind and see clearly, fear begins to disappear, and the life that fear stole from you slowly begins to return. 1. Fear is created by thought, not by the present moment. Fear feels extremely real because it creates strong physical sensations inside the body, but its true origin is almost always thought, not reality. Your heart begins to beat faster, your stomach feels tight, your breathing becomes shallow, and your muscles become tense, as if something dangerous is about to happen. But when you look closely, you often realize that nothing dangerous is actually happening in front of you. You are sitting safely, you are breathing, you are alive. The environment around you is calm, yet the body reacts as if there is a threat. This happens because the mind has created an imagined future and the body is responding to that imagination as if it were real. The mind begins to ask questions like, what if I fail? What if they reject me? What if everything goes wrong? These questions create mental images, and those images create emotional and physical reactions. But these reactions are not coming from reality, they are coming from thought. This is why fear can appear even when you are completely safe. For example, a person can feel fear while lying alone in their bed at night, not because something is attacking them, but because the mind is imagining something that might happen tomorrow. A student feels fear before an exam, not because they are failing in that moment, but because the mind is imagining the possibility of failure. A person feels fear before speaking in front of others, not because they are being rejected right now, but because the mind imagines rejection in the future. The mind creates these scenarios, repeats them again and again, and slowly the body begins to accept them as real threats. This shows how powerful thought can be. Thought alone can create suffering even when reality itself is calm and neutral. Buddhism teaches that the mind is like a storyteller. It constantly creates stories about the future and the past, and most of these stories are not real, they are only possibilities. But the problem is that the mind does not clearly distinguish between imagination and reality. When a fearful thought appears, the mind reacts as if it is already true. This is how illusion is created. The illusion feels real because the emotional and physical reactions are real, but the cause of those reactions is imagination, not reality. This is why two people can face the same situation and react differently. One person feels calm, while the other feels fear. The situation is the same, but the thoughts are different. This proves that fear is not created by the situation itself, but by the mind's interpretation of the situation. When you begin to observe fear carefully, you start to notice an important truth. Fear is always connected to something that has not happened yet. It is always connected to the future, not the present moment. In this present moment, you are simply existing. You are breathing in and breathing out. Your heart is beating. Your body is functioning naturally. Nothing is attacking you. Nothing is harming you. But the mind leaves this peaceful present moment and travels into an imagined future. It begins to create images of failure, rejection, loss, or embarrassment. These images create tension in the body, and this tension is experienced as fear. But the moment you bring your attention back to the present moment, you realize that these imagined threats do not exist right now. This realization is deeply liberating because it helps you understand that fear is not something you must obey automatically. Fear is a mental event, not an absolute truth. It is something that appears, stays for a short time, and then disappears. Just like clouds pass through the sky, fearful thoughts pass through the mind. They are temporary, not permanent. But most people do not observe fear. They immediately believe it. They assume that every fearful thought is a warning or a truth. This unconscious belief gives fear its power. Fear survives because it is believed without question. The moment you become aware of this process, something begins to change inside you. You begin to see fear differently. Instead of seeing it as a command you must obey, you begin to see it as a thought you can observe. You realize that just because the mind imagines something does not mean it will happen. You begin to create distance between yourself and your thoughts. You stop saying, "I am afraid," and instead you begin to see, "Fear is appearing in my mind." This small shift in awareness is powerful because it reminds you that you are not the fear itself. You are the observer of fear. As you continue to observe your thoughts without immediately believing them, fear begins to weaken. It loses its authority over your actions. Your nervous system begins to calm down because it is no longer reacting to imagined threats constantly. Your breathing becomes deeper. Your body becomes more relaxed. Your mind becomes quieter. This calmness is not something you force. It happens naturally when you stop feeding fear with unconscious belief. Over time, you begin to trust the present moment more than your imagination. You begin to realize that most of the things you feared never actually happened. And even when challenges do appear, you realize that you are capable of handling them. This realization builds inner strength. You no longer live as a prisoner of imagined futures. You begin to live fully in reality, and in reality, there is far less to fear than the mind makes you believe. 1. Fear is created by thought, not by the present moment. Fear feels extremely real because it creates strong physical sensations inside the body, but its true origin is almost always thought, not reality. Your heart begins to beat faster, your stomach feels tight, your breathing becomes shallow, and your muscles become tense, as if something dangerous is about to happen. But when you look closely, you often realize that nothing dangerous is actually happening in front of you. You are sitting safely, you are breathing, you are alive. The environment around you is calm, yet the body reacts as if there is a threat. This happens because the mind has created an imagined future and the body is responding to that imagination as if it were real. The mind begins to ask questions like, what if I fail? What if they reject me? What if everything goes wrong? These questions create mental images, and those images create emotional and physical reactions. But these reactions are not coming from reality, they are coming from thought. This is why fear can appear even when you are completely safe. For example, a person can feel fear while lying alone in their bed at night, not because something is attacking them, but because the mind is imagining something that might happen tomorrow. A student feels fear before an exam, not because they are failing in that moment, but because the mind is imagining the possibility of failure. A person feels fear before speaking in front of others, not because they are being rejected right now, but because the mind imagines rejection in the future. The mind creates these scenarios, repeats them again and again, and slowly the body begins to accept them as real threats. This shows how powerful thought can be. Thought alone can create suffering, even when reality itself is calm and neutral. Buddhism teaches that the mind is like a storyteller. It constantly creates stories about the future and the past, and most of these stories are not real. They are only possibilities. But the problem is that the mind does not clearly distinguish between imagination and reality. When a fearful thought appears, the mind reacts as if it is already true. This is how illusion is created. The illusion feels real because the emotional and physical reactions are real, but the cause of those reactions is imagination, not reality. This is why two people can face the same situation and react differently. One person feels calm, while the other feels fear. The situation is the same, but the thoughts are different. This proves that fear is not created by the situation itself, but by the mind's interpretation of the situation. When you begin to observe fear carefully, you start to notice an important truth. Fear is always connected to something that has not happened yet. It is always connected to the future, not the present moment. In this present moment, you are simply existing. You are breathing in and breathing out. Your heart is beating. Your body is functioning naturally. Nothing is attacking you. Nothing is harming you. But the mind leaves this peaceful present moment and travels into an imagined future. It begins to create images of failure, rejection, loss, or embarrassment. These images create tension in the body, and this tension is experienced as fear. But the moment you bring your attention back to the present moment, you realize that these imagined threats do not exist right now. This realization is deeply liberating because it helps you understand that fear is not something you must obey automatically. Fear is a mental event, not an absolute truth. It is something that appears, stays for a short time, and then disappears. Just like clouds pass through the sky, fearful thoughts pass through the mind. They are temporary, not permanent. But most people do not observe fear. They immediately believe it. They assume that every fearful thought is a warning or a truth. This unconscious belief gives fear its power. Fear survives because it is believed without question. 2. Fear cannot exist fully in the present moment. Fear cannot exist fully in the present moment because the present moment contains only what is real, while fear depends on imagination. The present moment is simply what is happening now. It is your breathing, your body sitting or standing, the sounds around you, and the simple fact that you are alive. There is nothing complicated about the present moment. It does not contain imagined failure. It does not contain imagined rejection. It does not contain imagined loss. These things exist only as thoughts about the future. But the mind has a habit of leaving the present moment and traveling forward in time, creating scenarios that have not happened yet. It begins to imagine what could go wrong, and the body reacts to those imagined possibilities as if they are already real. For example, a person sitting quietly may suddenly feel anxious, not because anything is wrong in that moment, but because their mind begins to imagine a future situation. They imagine losing an opportunity, being embarrassed, or facing rejection. The body does not know the difference between imagination and reality, so it reacts to the imagined scenario. The heart beats faster, muscles tighten, and the nervous system enters a state of alertness. But if the person brings their attention back to the present moment and simply observes their breathing, they begin to notice that nothing is actually wrong. The imagined danger does not exist now. It exists only in thought. This shows that fear cannot survive without mental time travel. It needs the mind to leave the present moment in order to exist. Buddhism teaches that suffering is created when the mind becomes lost in the past or future and forgets the present moment. The present moment is always the place of stability and peace, but the mind constantly moves away from it. It replays past mistakes, creating regret, or it imagines future problems, creating fear. This constant movement keeps the nervous system in a state of tension. But when you train your attention to return to the present moment, the mind begins to settle. You begin to experience reality directly, instead of experiencing imagination. You notice the feeling of air entering and leaving your lungs. You notice the weight of your body. You notice the sounds around you. These simple observations bring your awareness back to what is real instead of what is imagined. When awareness becomes anchored in the present moment, fear begins to lose its foundation. It cannot survive without future-based thinking. It cannot survive without imagination. It needs uncertainty to exist. But the present moment is certain. It is clear. It is stable. The more you remain present, the weaker fear becomes. This does not mean challenges will never appear in life, but it means you stop suffering from challenges that do not exist yet. You stop carrying imagined pain. Your nervous system begins to relax because it is no longer reacting to mental projections. Over time, you begin to see clearly how much of your fear was created by leaving the present moment. You begin to notice how often the mind tries to pull you into imagined futures. But instead of following it unconsciously, you return your attention to what is real. This simple shift changes your entire experience of life. Your mind becomes quieter. Your body becomes calmer. You begin to move through life with more clarity and stability because you are no longer living inside imagination. You are living inside reality. And in reality, the present moment is almost always calmer than the mind makes it seem. 3. Fear grows stronger when you resist it and weakens when you observe it. One of the most important truths about fear is that resistance makes it stronger, while calm observation makes it weaker. Most people do not realize this, so their natural reaction is to fight fear the moment it appears. They try to push it away, distract themselves, or force themselves to stop feeling it. They tell themselves, "I should not feel this way," or "I need to get rid of this feeling immediately." But this resistance sends a powerful signal to the mind that fear is dangerous and must be escaped. This creates even more tension in the nervous system. The body becomes more alert, the mind becomes more restless, and fear grows stronger because it is being treated as a threat. This happens because resistance creates internal conflict. One part of the mind is experiencing fear, while another part of the mind is trying to eliminate it. This inner struggle creates more stress and instability. Instead of calming down, the mind becomes divided. The more you try to force fear to disappear, the more attention you give it. And whatever you give attention to becomes stronger. This is why people who constantly try to escape fear often feel trapped by it. They are unknowingly feeding it through resistance. Buddhism teaches a completely different approach. Instead of resisting fear, it teaches observation. Observation means allowing fear to exist without trying to control it, suppress it, or escape it. It means watching the sensation of fear with calm awareness, just as you would watch clouds passing through the sky. When you observe fear without reacting, you begin to see its true nature. You notice how it appears in the body as tension, how it moves, and how it slowly changes. You realize that fear is not permanent. It is a temporary experience that comes and goes. For example, when fear appears, instead of trying to distract yourself, you can pause and observe it. You notice the tightness in your chest. You notice the thoughts moving through your mind. You notice the sensations without labeling them as good or bad. This simple observation creates space between you and the fear. You are no longer completely inside the fear. You are watching it. This shift is powerful because it breaks the automatic reaction of resistance. When fear is observed calmly, something natural begins to happen. The nervous system starts to relax. The intensity of fear begins to decrease. This happens because fear needs reaction to survive. It needs resistance, panic, and unconscious belief. But when you observe it calmly, you stop feeding it. It loses its energy. Just like a fire slowly fades when no fuel is added, fear begins to weaken when it is no longer fueled by resistance. This process also teaches you something deeper about yourself. You begin to realize that fear is not controlling you. It is simply appearing within your awareness. And anything that appears within your awareness is not who you truly are. You are the observer, not the fear itself. This realization creates inner stability. Even when fear appears, it no longer has the same power over your actions. You stop reacting automatically. You begin to respond with awareness. Over time, this practice transforms your relationship with fear. You no longer see it as an enemy that must be defeated. You see it as a temporary mental state that can be understood and observed. This understanding removes the mystery and intensity around fear. Your mind becomes calmer because it is no longer fighting itself. You begin to move through situations with more confidence and clarity because fear no longer controls your decisions. Instead of being trapped by fear, you remain grounded in awareness, and this awareness becomes your greatest source of inner strength. 4. A calm mind sees reality clearly, while fear creates illusion. Fear has the power to distort reality in a way that feels completely convincing, even when the distortion is not true. When fear enters the mind, it changes how you see yourself, how you see others, and how you see the world. It creates doubt where there was once confidence. It creates danger where there was once neutrality. It creates problems where there were once only possibilities. This happens because fear does not show you reality as it is. It shows you reality through the lens of protection and survival. The mind begins to assume that something is wrong, even when there is no clear evidence that anything is wrong. This is why fear is often called an illusion, not because the feeling itself is fake, but because the conclusions it creates are often not true. When the mind is controlled by fear, it begins to exaggerate situations. A small mistake feels like a permanent failure. A small rejection feels like complete unworthiness. A small uncertainty feels like a dangerous threat. The mind begins to create worst-case scenarios and treats them as if they are the most likely outcomes. This creates hesitation, avoidance, and self-doubt. A person may avoid speaking, avoid trying, or avoid moving forward, not because they are incapable, but because fear has created the illusion that they are incapable. This illusion feels real because it is repeated again and again in the mind, and repetition strengthens belief. Fear also changes how you see yourself. It makes you focus on your weaknesses instead of your strengths. It makes you forget your past successes and focus only on possible failures. It creates a false identity based on limitation instead of possibility. A person who is capable begins to believe they are incapable. A person who is strong begins to believe they are weak. This is the power of illusion. It does not change reality itself, but it changes how reality is perceived, and perception influences action. When perception is distorted, action becomes limited. Buddhism teaches that clarity comes from calmness. A calm mind does not rush to conclusions. It does not immediately assume danger. It observes first. It allows reality to reveal itself without distortion. When the mind is calm, it becomes like still water. And just like still water reflects clearly, a calm mind reflects reality clearly. But when the mind is disturbed by fear, it becomes like water filled with waves. And when water is disturbed, it cannot reflect clearly. Everything appears distorted. This is why calmness is not weakness. Calmness is strength. Calmness allows you to see situations as they truly are, instead of how fear imagines them to be. When your mind is calm, you can recognize when fear is exaggerating something. You can recognize when the mind is creating false conclusions. This awareness prevents fear from controlling your decisions. Instead of reacting impulsively, you respond wisely. You act based on reality, not imagination. A calm mind also allows you to trust yourself more deeply. Fear creates constant doubt. It makes you question your ability to handle situations, but calmness reconnects you with your inner stability. It reminds you that you are capable of facing uncertainty. It reminds you that you have survived difficult moments before. This creates confidence, not because you know everything will go perfectly, but because you trust your ability to handle whatever happens. When fear is present, the mind becomes noisy and unstable. Thoughts move quickly, jumping from one imagined outcome to another. This noise creates confusion. But when the mind becomes calm, the noise begins to fade. Thoughts slow down. Awareness becomes clearer. You begin to see that many of your fears were never based on reality. They were based on assumptions, interpretations, and imagination. This clarity changes how you move through life. You stop avoiding opportunities simply because they feel uncertain. You stop assuming failure before trying. You stop limiting yourself based on imagined outcomes. Instead, you begin to move forward with awareness and presence. You act based on what is real, not what is imagined. Over time, you begin to understand that calmness is your natural state, while fear is only a temporary disturbance. Fear may appear, but it cannot control a mind that sees clearly. Illusion cannot survive in the presence of awareness. And when your mind becomes calm, reality reveals itself without distortion, allowing you to live with clarity, confidence, and inner freedom. 5. Fear exists because of attachment and the illusion of control. Fear is deeply connected to attachment, and attachment is deeply connected to the illusion of control. Most fear does not come from what is happening right now, but from the possibility of losing something that the mind has become attached to. The mind becomes attached to comfort, attached to approval, attached to relationships, attached to identity, attached to stability, and attached to the idea that life should always move in a predictable and safe direction. When the mind believes it must hold on to these things in order to feel safe and complete, fear naturally appears. Fear becomes the mind's attempt to protect what it believes it cannot live without. It creates constant tension because life itself is constantly changing, and anything that changes cannot be fully controlled. This attachment begins to shape how you live your life. You may become afraid to speak honestly because you are attached to how others see you. You may become afraid to try something new because you are attached to feeling comfortable and avoiding failure. You may stay in situations that do not help you grow because you are attached to familiarity. The mind tells you that losing these things will cause pain, and so it creates fear as a way to prevent loss. But this creates a prison. Instead of living freely, you begin living cautiously, constantly trying to protect what you have and avoid what you fear. Buddhism teaches that this fear is rooted in misunderstanding the true nature of life. Life is impermanent. Everything changes. Every moment passes and transforms into the next. Your emotions change. Your circumstances change. Your relationships change. Even your body changes over time. This is not a problem. This is the natural movement of existence, but the mind resists this truth. It wants stability. It wants certainty. It wants guarantees. And when it realizes that nothing can be guaranteed forever, fear appears as a reaction to uncertainty. The illusion of control is one of the main reasons fear feels so strong. The mind believes that if it can control everything, it can prevent pain and create permanent security. But in reality, complete control does not exist. You cannot control every outcome. You cannot control every person's actions. You cannot control every future event. Trying to control everything creates constant stress because the mind is fighting against the natural flow of life. It is trying to freeze what cannot be frozen and secure what cannot be permanently secured. This constant attempt to control life creates mental exhaustion. The mind becomes tense, always scanning for possible threats, always trying to predict what might go wrong. It begins to live in defense instead of presence. Even when nothing is wrong, the mind remains alert because it believes it must protect itself from possible loss. This is how fear becomes a continuous background experience. It is not always loud, but it is always present, quietly influencing decisions and limiting freedom. When you begin to understand impermanence deeply, something begins to change. You realize that change is not your enemy. Change is simply the nature of life. Everything you fear losing was never permanent to begin with. This realization does not create weakness, it creates freedom. Because when you stop trying to hold on to everything, you stop living in constant fear of losing everything. You begin to trust that you can handle change because change is natural. This trust does not mean life will never bring challenges. It means you stop fearing challenges before they arrive. You stop carrying imagined pain in advance. You begin to live with openness instead of resistance. You allow life to unfold without constantly trying to control every detail. This creates calmness because the mind is no longer fighting against reality. You also begin to realize that your sense of stability does not come from controlling external situations. It comes from your internal awareness. External situations will always change, but awareness remains constant. When you are connected to this awareness, you do not depend on external certainty to feel stable. You understand that uncertainty is part of life, and you trust your ability to navigate it. As attachment begins to loosen, fear begins to weaken. The mind stops clinging so tightly to outcomes. It stops demanding guarantees. It becomes more flexible, more open, and more peaceful. You begin to move through life with less tension because you are no longer trying to control what cannot be controlled. Instead, you focus on being present, aware, and responsive to each moment as it comes. This shift transforms your relationship with life. Instead of living in fear of loss, you begin to live with acceptance of change. Instead of trying to control everything, you begin to trust the natural flow of existence. And in this trust, fear loses its foundation, because fear cannot survive in a mind that no longer depends on control for its sense of safety. 6. Courage is acting with awareness even when fear is present. One of the biggest misunderstandings people have about courage is believing that courageous people do not feel fear. In reality, courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the decision not to obey fear. Fear may still appear in the mind, but courage is what allows you to move forward without allowing fear to control your actions. Most people wait for fear to disappear before they act. They believe they must feel completely confident, completely ready, and completely certain before they take a step forward. But this moment rarely comes. The mind will always find reasons to doubt, reasons to delay, and reasons to stay inside what feels safe and familiar. If you wait for fear to disappear completely, you may wait your entire life without ever moving forward. Fear's true power does not come from its presence, it comes from obedience. The moment you obey fear, it strengthens its control over your life. Each time you avoid something because of fear, you teach your mind that fear is correct and must be followed. This creates a pattern. The mind begins to automatically choose safety over growth, comfort over possibility, and avoidance over action. Slowly, your world becomes smaller, not because you are incapable, but because fear has trained you to stay inside invisible boundaries. These boundaries feel real, but they are created by repeated obedience to fearful thoughts. Buddhism teaches that awareness is the key to breaking this cycle. Awareness allows you to see fear without becoming controlled by it. When fear appears, awareness helps you recognize that it is only a mental and physical experience, not a command you must follow. This creates space between you and your fear. In this space, you gain the ability to choose your response consciously instead of reacting automatically. This is where courage is born. Courage is not something you wait for. Courage is something you practice by choosing awareness instead of unconscious reaction. When you act with awareness, you begin to realize something important. Fear is strongest before action, but it weakens after action begins. The mind creates exaggerated scenarios about what might happen, but once you step forward, you begin to experience reality instead of imagination. Most of the time, reality is far less frightening than the mind predicted. And even when situations are difficult, you begin to discover your ability to handle them. This builds inner trust. You begin to trust yourself not because life becomes predictable, but because you realize you are capable of facing uncertainty. Each time you act despite fear, you weaken its influence over your mind. You show yourself that fear does not control your life unless you allow it. This creates a new pattern. Instead of automatically obeying fear, you begin to observe it and move forward anyway. Over time, fear loses its authority. It may still appear, but it no longer has the power to stop you. You begin to see fear as a temporary sensation, not a permanent barrier. This process also transforms how you see yourself. You stop seeing yourself as fragile and begin seeing yourself as capable. You stop identifying with fear and begin identifying with awareness. You realize that fear is something you experience, not something you are. This realization creates deep inner strength because your actions are no longer controlled by emotional impulses. They are guided by conscious awareness. Courage also creates freedom. When fear no longer controls your decisions, you begin to live more fully. You begin to explore opportunities that you once avoided. You begin to express yourself more honestly. You begin to trust your path instead of constantly doubting it. Life becomes more open, more expansive, and more meaningful because you are no longer limiting yourself based on imagined outcomes. This does not mean fear will never appear again. Fear is part of the human experience, but fear loses its ability to control a mind that is rooted in awareness. It becomes just another passing experience, like a wave rising and falling in the ocean. You observe it, you feel it, but you do not become trapped by it. You remain grounded in awareness, and from this awareness, you act with clarity and strength. Over time, you begin to understand that courage is not something extraordinary. It is something natural that emerges when you stop allowing fear to control your life. It grows each time you choose awareness over avoidance. It grows each time you move forward despite uncertainty. And as courage grows, fear begins to fade into the background, no longer controlling your path, no longer limiting your life, and no longer defining who you are. 7. Your true nature is already calm. Fear is only a temporary visitor. One of the deepest truths taught in Buddhism is that calmness is not something you must create, but something you must rediscover. Your true nature is already calm, already aware, and already stable. Fear is not your natural state. Fear is something that appears temporarily, like a visitor entering and leaving your mind. But most people make a mistake. They believe fear is part of who they are. They believe fear defines them. They say, "I am a fearful person," instead of recognizing that fear is simply an experience that appears within awareness. This misunderstanding gives fear a permanent identity, even though fear itself is temporary. If you observe your mind carefully, you will notice that fear does not remain forever. It comes, stays for a while, and then leaves. There were moments in your past when you felt intense fear, but those moments passed. The fear did not remain permanently. It changed, faded, and disappeared. This shows that fear is not your true nature. Your true nature is the awareness that observes fear. Awareness remains constant, while fear constantly changes. But because people focus so much on the feeling of fear, they forget the presence of awareness behind it. Imagine the sky and the clouds. The sky represents your true nature, and the clouds represent fear. Clouds appear, move, and disappear, but the sky itself remains unchanged. The sky is not harmed by the clouds. It is not defined by the clouds. It simply allows the clouds to pass. In the same way, your awareness is not harmed by fear. Fear appears within awareness, moves through awareness, and eventually disappears, while awareness itself remains calm and stable. But when you forget your true nature, you begin to identify with the clouds instead of the sky. You begin to believe that fear is permanent, even though it is not. Fear feels permanent only when you resist it or become lost in it. When you believe fear completely, it creates the illusion that it will never end. But when you observe fear with awareness, you begin to see its temporary nature. You notice how it rises, reaches intensity, and then slowly fades. This observation reminds you that fear is not something you must eliminate completely. It is something you allow to pass naturally without attaching to it. The more you observe fear without identifying with it, the more you reconnect with your natural calmness. Your calmness is always present beneath the surface. Even in moments of fear, calmness exists underneath. It is like the deep ocean beneath the waves. The surface may be disturbed by waves, but the depth remains still. Fear disturbs the surface of the mind, but the deeper level of awareness remains peaceful. When you bring your attention to this deeper level, you begin to experience stability even while fear is present. You realize that fear cannot destroy your inner calmness. It can only temporarily cover it. This realization changes your relationship with fear completely. Instead of trying to escape fear, you begin to allow it to exist without believing it defines you. You stop seeing fear as an enemy and begin seeing it as a temporary experience. This removes its power to control your identity. You begin to understand that fear does not control who you are. Awareness defines who you are. Awareness is calm, stable, and free. As you continue to reconnect with this awareness, your mind becomes naturally calmer. You stop reacting to every fearful thought. You stop assuming that fear must control your actions. You begin to trust the stability within yourself. This trust creates deep inner peace because you realize that nothing outside you can destroy your true nature. External situations may change. Emotions may rise and fall. Fear may appear and disappear, but your awareness remains constant. Over time, you begin to live with a sense of inner freedom. Fear may still visit your mind, but it no longer stays as a permanent resident. It comes and goes without controlling your life. You remain grounded in awareness, and this awareness becomes your refuge. You begin to experience life with more calmness, more clarity, and more strength, not because fear never appears, but because you no longer identify with it. You begin to understand that calmness was never something you needed to chase. It was always within you. It was simply hidden beneath layers of thought, attachment, and unconscious belief. When these layers begin to dissolve, your natural calmness reveals itself. And in this calmness, fear loses its power, illusion fades, and you finally experience the freedom that has always been your true nature. 8. When you stop believing fear, you reclaim your life completely. There comes a moment in every person's life when they begin to realize that fear has quietly shaped most of their decisions. Not because fear was always loud, but because it was always present in subtle ways. It was present when you stayed silent, even though you wanted to speak. It was present when you avoided opportunities, even though you felt capable. It was present when you doubted yourself before even trying. Fear does not always appear as panic. Sometimes it appears as hesitation. Sometimes it appears as overthinking. Sometimes it appears as waiting for the right time that never arrives. Over time, fear begins to shape your life not through force, but through limitation. It slowly convinces you to live a smaller version of your true potential. The most important realization you can have is that fear survives through belief. Fear has no independent power of its own. It becomes powerful only when you believe it without questioning it. The mind produces a thought, and that thought says something might go wrong. Instead of observing the thought, you immediately believe it. You accept it as truth, and the moment you believe it, your body reacts, your emotions react, your decisions react. Fear begins to influence your behavior, but if that same thought appeared and you did not believe it, it would lose its power immediately. It would simply pass like any other thought. This shows that belief is the fuel that keeps fear alive. Buddhism teaches that the mind creates suffering not because thoughts exist, but because of attachment to thoughts. When you attach to fearful thoughts, you treat them as reality, but thoughts are not reality. Thoughts are mental events. They appear, exist briefly, and disappear. They do not control you unless you identify with them. The moment you stop identifying with fearful thoughts, you create space between yourself and fear. In this space, you begin to see clearly. You begin to recognize that fear was never controlling your life. Your unconscious belief in fear was controlling your life. This realization changes everything because it returns power back to you. You begin to understand that you are not a victim of fear. You are the observer of fear. Fear may appear, but it does not define you. It does not control your true nature. It is simply something that passes through your awareness. And anything that passes through awareness cannot be permanent. This understanding creates a deep shift in how you experience life. You stop reacting automatically. You stop obeying fear without question. You begin to observe it calmly. At first, fear may still appear frequently because the mind is used to creating it. The mind has developed habits over many years. It has learned to expect danger, expect rejection, and expect failure as a form of protection. But as your awareness grows, you begin to see these patterns clearly. You begin to recognize fearful thoughts as patterns, not truth. This recognition weakens their influence. Each time you observe fear without believing it, you reduce its power over your life. You also begin to notice how much of your past behavior was influenced by imagined scenarios that never actually happened. You may remember moments when you avoided opportunities because you feared failure, but failure never came. You may remember moments when you feared rejection, but rejection never occurred. This shows how fear often creates suffering based on events that exist only in imagination. When you stop believing fear automatically, you stop suffering from imagined futures. You begin to live in reality instead of imagination. This shift brings a deep sense of freedom. Freedom does not mean fear disappears completely. Freedom means fear no longer controls your decisions. You begin to act based on awareness, not based on imagined outcomes. You begin to trust yourself more deeply because you are no longer constantly doubting your ability to handle life. You understand that uncertainty is part of existence, and you no longer need complete certainty to move forward. Your nervous system also begins to calm down as fear loses its influence. The body is no longer constantly preparing for imagined threats. Your breathing becomes deeper and more relaxed. Your mind becomes quieter. You experience moments of stillness that were previously hidden beneath layers of fear and overthinking. This stillness reconnects you with your true nature. It reminds you that peace is not something you must create. Peace is something that appears naturally when fear is no longer believed. You also begin to experience life more fully because fear is no longer limiting your actions. You begin to express yourself more honestly. You begin to pursue opportunities that once felt too intimidating. You begin to trust your inner guidance instead of constantly seeking external reassurance. Life becomes more open and expansive because you are no longer living inside invisible boundaries created by fear. This transformation does not happen instantly. It happens gradually as awareness grows. Each moment of awareness weakens fear. Each moment of observation strengthens clarity. Over time, fear becomes less frequent and less intense because it is no longer being reinforced by belief. The mind begins to return to its natural state of calmness. You also begin to understand that fear was never protecting your life. It was protecting your comfort zone. It was preventing growth, preventing exploration, and preventing transformation. When you stop believing fear, you allow yourself to grow beyond the limits that once defined you. You begin to experience your true potential because you are no longer controlled by imagined limitations. This is the moment when you reclaim your life. Not by eliminating fear completely, but by no longer being controlled by it. Fear becomes just another experience that comes and goes. It no longer defines your identity. It no longer determines your actions. You remain grounded in awareness, calmness, and clarity. And in this awareness, you realize something profound. You were never truly trapped by fear. You were only trapped by belief. The moment belief dissolves, fear dissolves with it. What remains is your true nature, calm, aware, free, and fully alive. 9. When you calm your mind, life begins to move with you instead of against you. Most people believe that life is difficult because the world is against them, because circumstances are unfair, or because challenges keep appearing without warning. But what Buddhism teaches is something far deeper and far more liberating. Life itself is not against you. Life is neutral. Life simply moves, changes, and unfolds according to its nature. The real struggle begins inside the mind. When the mind is filled with fear, resistance, and constant tension, everything begins to feel heavy. Simple decisions feel overwhelming. Small problems feel unbearable. Even peaceful moments feel incomplete because the mind is always searching for what could go wrong. This is how fear creates the illusion that life itself is the enemy, when in truth, the real conflict exists within the mind. When the mind is disturbed by fear, it loses its ability to see clearly. It becomes trapped in constant anticipation of danger. It begins to interpret neutral situations as negative. A delayed response feels like rejection. A small mistake feels like failure. An uncertain future feels like guaranteed loss. Fear creates a mental filter that distorts perception. Instead of seeing reality as it is, the mind sees reality through the lens of protection and survival. This creates constant resistance because the mind is always trying to control outcomes and avoid discomfort. But life cannot be fully controlled. And when the mind tries to control what cannot be controlled, it creates endless frustration. This is why life feels heavy when the mind is full of fear. It is not because life itself is heavy, it is because fear creates resistance to the natural flow of existence. Resistance is like swimming against the current of a river. The more you resist, the more exhausted you become. The current itself is not your enemy. The exhaustion comes from fighting it. In the same way, life itself is not creating your suffering. The suffering is created by the mind's resistance to uncertainty, change, and impermanence. When you calm your mind, something remarkable begins to happen. You stop fighting every moment. You stop trying to predict and control every possible outcome. You begin to trust the natural movement of life. This trust does not come from knowing exactly what will happen. It comes from knowing that you can face whatever happens with awareness and stability. The mind stops creating unnecessary tension because it is no longer trying to solve problems that do not exist yet. As the mind becomes calm, perception becomes clearer. You begin to see situations more accurately instead of seeing them through fear. Problems that once felt overwhelming begin to feel manageable. Decisions that once felt impossible begin to feel simple. This is not because life suddenly becomes easier. It is because the mind is no longer creating additional suffering through fear and resistance. You are experiencing reality directly instead of experiencing your interpretation of reality. A calm mind also improves your ability to respond wisely. Fear creates impulsive reactions. It pushes you to escape, avoid, or panic. But calmness creates space. In this space, you can observe, understand, and respond consciously. This leads to better decisions and more effective actions. You begin to move through life with clarity instead of confusion. This clarity allows life to flow more smoothly because your actions are no longer driven by fear. You also begin to notice that many of the obstacles you once feared were never as powerful as they appeared. Fear had exaggerated their size. Fear had made them appear permanent. But when the mind becomes calm, you begin to see their true nature. Most challenges are temporary. Most problems can be solved. Most uncertainties resolve themselves over time. Fear had created the illusion that everything was more dangerous and permanent than it actually was. Calmness also reconnects you with the present moment. Fear lives in imagined futures, but calmness exists in reality. When you are fully present, you stop carrying imagined pain. You stop suffering from events that have not happened. You begin to experience life as it is instead of how fear imagines it to be. This creates a sense of lightness and freedom. The mind is no longer burdened by constant anticipation of danger. As this calmness deepens, you begin to trust life more. You realize that life is not something you must control completely. Life is something you experience moment by moment. You begin to move with life instead of against it. This does not mean life will always be comfortable, but it means you are no longer creating additional suffering through resistance. You are allowing life to unfold naturally. This trust creates inner stability. External situations may change, but your inner awareness remains steady. You no longer depend on external certainty to feel secure. You find security within your awareness itself. This awareness becomes your foundation. It allows you to face uncertainty without panic. It allows you to face challenges without losing your stability. Over time, you begin to realize that life was never against you. Fear had created that illusion. Fear had made everything feel hostile and unpredictable. But when fear loses its influence, life begins to feel different. Opportunities become visible. Possibilities become clearer. You begin to see paths that fear had hidden from you. Life begins to move with you because you are no longer resisting it. You are no longer trapped inside imagined limitations. Your actions become aligned with awareness instead of fear. This alignment creates harmony between your inner state and external reality. You begin to move through life with greater ease, clarity, and confidence. This is the power of a calm mind. It does not change life itself, it changes your relationship with life. It removes illusion and reveals reality. It replaces fear with awareness. And in this awareness, you discover that life was never your enemy. Life was always flowing, and the moment your mind becomes calm, you begin to flow with it. 10. Freedom begins the moment you realize fear was never in control. There is a moment of awakening that changes everything, and it does not come from changing the world around you. It comes from realizing that fear was never truly in control of your life. For most of your life, fear may have felt like a powerful force, guiding your decisions, shaping your actions, and limiting your potential. It may have felt like something outside of your control, something you had to obey in order to stay safe. But Buddhism teaches a truth that is both simple and life-changing. Fear was never in control. The only thing that gave fear control was unconscious belief. The moment you begin to see fear clearly, without automatically believing it, its power begins to dissolve. Fear creates the illusion of control by speaking in a convincing voice. It tells you that it is protecting you. It tells you that avoiding risk will keep you safe. It tells you that staying inside your comfort zone will prevent pain. But what fear never tells you is that it also prevents growth, prevents transformation, and prevents you from experiencing the fullness of your life. Fear does not only protect you from pain, it also protects you from possibility. It keeps you inside the known, even when the known is limiting and unfulfilling. It creates a life that feels safe, but incomplete. The reason fear feels so powerful is because it operates automatically. It appears in the mind without invitation, and if you are not aware, you immediately obey it. You assume its message is true. You assume its warnings are accurate. You do not question it. This unconscious obedience creates the illusion that fear is in control. But when awareness enters the process, everything begins to change. Awareness allows you to observe fear instead of automatically reacting to it. It allows you to see fear as a mental experience, not as a command you must follow. When you observe fear with awareness, you begin to notice something important. Fear does not force you to act. Fear only suggests. It creates thoughts, sensations, and emotions, but it does not control your actions unless you allow it. This realization is deeply empowering because it reminds you that you always have a choice. You can observe fear without obeying it. You can feel fear without being controlled by it. You can move forward even while fear is present. This is where true freedom begins. Freedom does not come from eliminating fear completely. Freedom comes from no longer being controlled by fear. Fear may still appear from time to time because it is part of the human mind, but it no longer defines your decisions. It no longer determines your path. It becomes just another experience that passes through your awareness. This shift changes how you experience yourself. You stop seeing yourself as fragile and begin seeing yourself as stable. You stop identifying with fear and begin identifying with awareness. You begin to trust yourself more deeply because you realize that fear cannot control you unless you believe it blindly. This trust creates inner strength. You begin to move through life with confidence, not because fear never appears, but because fear no longer controls your actions. As awareness grows, fear begins to lose its influence naturally. It appears less frequently, and when it does appear, it feels less convincing. You begin to recognize its patterns. You begin to see how it tries to predict negative outcomes and create unnecessary tension, but instead of reacting automatically, you observe it calmly. This calm observation prevents fear from taking control of your nervous system. Your body remains more relaxed. Your mind remains clearer. Your actions remain intentional. You also begin to notice how much of your past limitation was created by fear. Opportunities you avoided, words you never spoke, paths you never explored. All because fear created imagined outcomes that felt real at the time. But now, with awareness, you begin to see that those imagined outcomes were never guaranteed. They were only possibilities. And by obeying fear, you limited your experience based on imagination instead of reality. This realization does not create regret. It creates clarity. It helps you understand that you can choose differently now. You can live with awareness instead of unconscious fear. You can move forward without waiting for fear to disappear completely. You can act based on truth instead of illusion. This awareness also reconnects you with your true nature. Beneath fear, beneath thought, beneath emotion, there is a deeper presence within you that remains calm and stable. This presence is your awareness. It has always been there, quietly observing every experience. Fear may appear on the surface, but awareness remains unchanged. When you rest in this awareness, you experience a sense of inner freedom that fear cannot disturb. Life also begins to feel different when fear no longer controls your mind. You become more open to experience. You become more willing to explore uncertainty. You become more present in each moment instead of constantly worrying about the future. This openness allows life to unfold more naturally. Opportunities become visible because you are no longer avoiding them. Growth becomes possible because you are no longer limiting yourself. You begin to understand that fear was never your enemy. It was simply a mental pattern created to protect you from uncertainty. But protection is no longer necessary when awareness is present. Awareness provides a deeper form of stability, one that does not depend on controlling external circumstances. This stability allows you to move through life with calmness and trust. Over time, fear becomes just another passing experience, no different from a passing thought or emotion. It no longer controls your identity. It no longer defines your path. You remain grounded in awareness, and this awareness becomes your true source of freedom. This is the moment when you reclaim your life fully, not by eliminating fear, but by seeing through it. Not by controlling every outcome, but by trusting your awareness. Not by avoiding uncertainty, but by embracing reality as it is. And in this realization, you discover something that was always true. Fear was never in control. You were always the awareness behind it. 11. The moment you stop running from fear, it stops chasing you. For most of your life, fear has felt like something you needed to escape. The moment fear appeared, your instinct was to move away from it, avoid it, silence it, or distract yourself from it. This reaction feels natural because fear creates discomfort, and the mind is conditioned to move toward comfort and away from discomfort. But what most people never realize is that running from fear is exactly what gives it power. The more you run from fear, the more it follows you. The more you avoid situations that trigger fear, the more your mind learns that fear is something dangerous that must be escaped. This strengthens fear's presence in your life and reinforces the illusion that fear is stronger than you. Fear grows in avoidance because avoidance teaches the mind that fear is correct. Each time you avoid something because of fear, you send a message to your nervous system that the fear was justified. The mind then becomes more sensitive to similar situations in the future. It begins to anticipate fear before it even appears. This creates a cycle. Fear leads to avoidance, and avoidance leads to more fear. Over time, this cycle can begin to shape your entire life. You may avoid opportunities, avoid conversations, avoid risks, and avoid growth, not because you are incapable, but because fear has trained you to stay within safe boundaries. Buddhism teaches that the way to break this cycle is not through escape, but through awareness. Instead of running from fear, you begin to face it with calm observation. This does not mean forcing yourself into extreme situations or overwhelming yourself. It means allowing fear to exist without immediately trying to escape it. It means sitting with the sensation of fear and observing it as it is. When you do this, something unexpected begins to happen. Fear begins to lose its intensity. This happens because fear depends on resistance and avoidance to survive. Fear needs you to treat it as a threat. But when you stop running from fear and simply observe it, you remove the resistance. You stop feeding it. The mind begins to realize that fear itself is not dangerous. It is only a sensation, only a temporary experience passing through your awareness. At first, this may feel uncomfortable because the mind is not used to facing fear directly. It is used to escaping it. But as you remain present with fear, you begin to see its true nature. You notice that fear is not permanent. It rises, reaches intensity, and then slowly fades. It cannot remain forever because it is not your true nature. It is only a temporary state of the nervous system. This realization changes your relationship with fear completely. You stop seeing fear as something you must escape. You begin to see it as something you can observe. This removes its authority over your actions. Fear may still appear, but it no longer controls your decisions. You begin to move forward even while fear is present. This is where true inner strength begins to develop. When you stop running from fear, you also stop running from yourself. Fear often reflects the mind's uncertainty about the unknown. It reflects the mind's desire for safety and certainty. But certainty is not required for awareness. Awareness remains stable even in uncertainty. When you trust your awareness, you no longer need to escape fear. You know that fear cannot harm your true nature. This creates a deep sense of freedom. Freedom does not come from eliminating fear completely. Freedom comes from knowing that fear does not control you. You can experience fear without becoming trapped by it. You can feel uncertainty without losing your stability. You can face the unknown without losing your sense of self. As you practice observing fear, instead of escaping it, your nervous system begins to change. The automatic reaction of panic begins to weaken. The mind becomes calmer because it is no longer constantly resisting itself. The body becomes more relaxed because it is no longer preparing for imagined threats. This calmness allows you to respond to life more clearly. You also begin to notice that many fears lose their intensity once you stop avoiding them. Situations that once felt overwhelming begin to feel manageable. Conversations that once felt intimidating begin to feel natural. Challenges that once felt impossible begin to feel like opportunities for growth. This is not because the external world has changed. It is because your relationship with fear has changed. You begin to realize that fear was never chasing you. It was your resistance that kept it alive. When resistance disappears, fear has nothing to hold on to. It fades naturally, like a shadow disappearing when light enters the room. This understanding brings deep peace. You stop living in constant avoidance. You stop limiting your life based on imagined threats. You begin to move through life with openness and awareness. You begin to trust yourself more deeply because you know that fear cannot control your true nature. Over time, fear becomes less frequent and less convincing. It becomes just another passing experience. You remain grounded in awareness, and this awareness becomes your refuge. You no longer need to run from fear because you understand that fear has no power over a mind that remains calm and aware. And in this realization, something profound happens. The moment you stop running from fear, fear stops chasing you. 12. When your mind becomes still, fear has nowhere left to exist. There is a profound truth that most people overlook their entire lives, and that truth is this: fear cannot survive in a still mind. Fear needs movement. It needs constant thinking, constant imagining, constant projecting into the future. It needs the mind to remain restless and distracted, because only in restlessness can fear continue creating illusions. But when the mind becomes still, when thinking slows down and awareness becomes steady, fear begins to lose its foundation. It has nowhere left to exist because fear depends on mental noise to survive. Most people live with a restless mind without even realizing it. From the moment they wake up, their thoughts begin moving rapidly. They think about the future. They think about responsibilities. They think about problems that have not happened yet. Even during moments of rest, the mind continues its activity. It replays past experiences, imagines future scenarios, and creates endless internal dialogue. This constant mental activity creates the perfect environment for fear, because within this noise, fear can hide and grow unnoticed. Fear does not usually appear in silence. It appears in thinking. It appears when the mind begins asking questions that have no immediate answers. It asks, what if something goes wrong? It asks, what if I fail? It asks, what if I lose what I have? These questions create uncertainty, and uncertainty creates fear. But these questions exist only in thought. They do not exist in the present moment. They exist in imagination. Buddhism teaches that the mind is like water. When water is disturbed, it becomes cloudy. You cannot see clearly through it. But when water becomes still, the cloudiness settles and clarity returns naturally. In the same way, when the mind is disturbed by constant thinking, clarity disappears and fear appears. But when the mind becomes still, clarity returns and fear fades. Stillness does not mean forcing the mind to stop thinking completely. Stillness means allowing thoughts to pass without becoming attached to them. It means observing thoughts without following them. When you observe thoughts without reacting, they begin to slow down naturally. The mind begins to settle. Awareness becomes clearer. In this stillness, you begin to notice something important. Fear is not constant. It appears only when thought creates it. When thought slows down, fear disappears. You begin to experience moments where the mind is completely quiet, and in those moments, fear does not exist. There is only presence, only awareness, only calmness. This shows that fear is not your natural state. Your natural state is stillness. Fear is only a disturbance that appears when the mind becomes restless. When the mind returns to stillness, fear disappears because it has no support. It cannot exist without thought to sustain it. Stillness also reconnects you with the present moment. Fear lives in imagined futures, but stillness exists in the present. When you are fully present, you are not thinking about what might happen tomorrow. You are simply aware of what is happening now. In this awareness, there is no imagined danger. There is only reality as it is. This present moment awareness creates deep inner peace. The nervous system relaxes because it is no longer reacting to imagined threats. The body becomes calm because it is no longer preparing for danger that does not exist. The mind becomes clear because it is no longer clouded by constant thinking. As you begin to experience this stillness more often, your relationship with fear begins to change. Fear may still appear occasionally, but it no longer feels permanent. It no longer feels overwhelming. You begin to recognize it as a temporary disturbance, not as a permanent condition. You begin to trust the stillness within yourself more than the fear within your thoughts. This trust creates stability. You stop depending on external certainty to feel safe. You begin to feel safe within your own awareness. This inner safety is not dependent on controlling the future. It comes from knowing that your awareness remains calm regardless of what happens externally. Stillness also strengthens your ability to respond wisely. When the mind is restless, decisions are often driven by fear and impulse. But when the mind is still, decisions come from clarity. You are able to see situations as they truly are, without distortion. This allows you to act with confidence and wisdom. Over time, stillness becomes your natural state. You no longer feel the need to constantly think about the future. You no longer feel controlled by imagined outcomes. You begin to experience life moment by moment without unnecessary tension. This creates a sense of freedom that fear cannot disturb. You also begin to realize that stillness was always within you. It was never absent. It was simply hidden beneath layers of thought, distraction, and unconscious fear. When these layers begin to dissolve, stillness reveals itself naturally, and in this stillness, fear has no foundation. This is why Buddhism emphasizes meditation and awareness, not because stillness is something you must create, but because stillness is something you must rediscover. It is already present beneath the surface of your thinking mind. It is your true nature. As you continue to reconnect with this stillness, fear loses its influence over your life completely. It may appear briefly, but it cannot remain. It cannot control a mind that remains grounded in awareness. And in this realization, you discover something deeply liberating. When your mind becomes still, fear has nowhere left to exist. At the deepest level, fear was never your enemy. It was never a force controlling your destiny. It was only a creation of the mind, born from thought, strengthened by imagination, and sustained by unconscious belief. It appeared powerful because you believed it without question. It appeared permanent because you identified with it. But the moment you began to observe it with awareness, its illusion began to break. You began to see that fear was never solid. It was never permanent. It was only a temporary disturbance passing through the vast stillness of your awareness. Buddhism teaches that your true nature has always been calm, clear, and free. Beneath all the noise of thinking, beneath all the tension of fear, there is a deeper presence within you that remains untouched. This presence does not panic. It does not resist. It simply observes. When you reconnect with this awareness, fear loses its authority over your life. It may still appear from time to time, but it no longer controls your actions. It no longer defines your identity. It no longer limits your path. You begin to move through life differently. You stop waiting for fear to disappear before taking action. You stop allowing imagined futures to control your present moment. You begin to trust yourself more deeply, not because life becomes certain, but because you realize that your awareness remains stable even in uncertainty. This trust creates freedom. It allows you to live fully, without being trapped inside invisible boundaries created by fear. Life itself begins to feel lighter. The constant tension begins to dissolve. Your mind becomes quieter. Your body becomes more relaxed. You begin to experience moments of peace that were always present, but hidden beneath layers of fear and overthinking. Decisions become clearer because they are no longer clouded by imagined threats. Actions become stronger because they are guided by awareness instead of fear. You also begin to understand something profound. Fear was never protecting your life. It was protecting your comfort zone. It was preventing growth, preventing transformation, and preventing you from stepping into your true potential. But now, with awareness, you are no longer controlled by comfort or avoidance. You are guided by clarity. You are guided by presence. You are guided by truth. This is what it means to calm your mind. It does not mean eliminating fear completely. It means seeing through fear. It means recognizing that fear has no power over a mind that remains calm and aware. It means returning to the present moment, where life is always unfolding naturally. And in this calmness, you take your life back. You stop living in imagination. You start living in reality. You stop obeying fear. You start trusting awareness. Because the moment your mind becomes calm, fear disappears, illusion fades, and your true freedom begins.